So thanks everybody for joining us today for Access to Justice Week. The topic is supporting the work, how new lawyers are being trained to overcome access to justice barriers. So before we get started, I will read the land and water acknowledgement. So between 1871 and 1906, treaty commissioners acting on behalf of the Crown signed 7 treaties with First Nation leaders in what is now called Manitoba. This land is the homeland of the Métis Nation and traditional territory of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Anishinaabe, Oji-Cree, and Ojibwe nations, all of whom have and had a spiritual relationship with this land since time immemorial before the signing of the treaties. The MVA represents approximately 1,600 diverse members throughout our province. Our membership includes students, faculty members, lawyers, and judges from a variety of backgrounds who gather in lands and territories, sharing the rights and obligations of these 7 treaties. We are pleased to welcome participants from the different territories across Canada. We ask that you each consider, well, I guess we don't have anybody from different territories, but just from Manitoba. We also wish to acknowledge that the water we enjoy in Winnipeg comes from Shoal Lake, the lands of the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Okay. I will also introduce our speakers for today, our panelists. And just so you're aware, any questions will be saved till the end. What we'll do is kind of a roundtable discussion. I'll ask the panelists some questions. They'll each give their opinions or their perspective on how the work can be completed. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So you can put any of those in the chat and I will go through them once we're done with the initial questions. So here we have Laurel A. Harris, KC. Laurel A. Harris, KC, she, her, currently serves as the director of the internationally trained lawyer program, Equity and Transformation at Robson Hall. She holds a BA in Women's Studies and History and has taken an undergraduate studies in Women's Studies and Black Studies at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Laurel earned her law degree in 2001 at Robson Hall and is an experienced litigator with formal training in mediation, arbitration, and conflict resolution. Ms. Harris founded Equitable Solutions Consulting in 2020, leveraging her legal expertise and extensive experience engaging in anti-racism and equity work to work with organizations within and outside of the legal community. She has wide-ranging expertise in areas of equitable organizational assessment and design, policy development and implementation, workplace investigations, system reviews, leadership development, and anti-racism education. Laurel has been called upon to act as a subject matter expert in anti-racism and equity, including with the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, and led the review into systemic racism and oppression at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Laurel serves as a director with the Manitoba Law Foundation and sits on the Legal Aid Manitoba Advisory Committee. She also chairs the Manitoba Bar Association's Equality Section and was awarded the MBA's Equality Award in 2022. A geeky introvert, Laurel spends her spare time planning new travels, reading urban fantasy, and dreaming of the Oxford comma. That's a good one, Laurel. All right, let me go on to the next panelist here. So AO. AO is an internationally trained lawyer and an active partner that co-founded law firm in Lagos, Nigeria. He requalified in Canada in 2020. Upon his requalification, he maintains a practice with Restall and Restall LLP, is currently an in-house counsel with Diligent Corporation, and manages the Canada legal team where he advises on technology, transactions, cybersecurity, privacy, and associated fields. And Kaylee LaFontaine, they, serves as the pre-law coordinator at the University College of the North. A proud member of Opaskwayak, sorry, I'm really bad at pronunciations, Cree Nation. Kaylee resides, sorry, repeat it?
Opaskwayak.
Opaskwayak, that's actually much easier than I would have thought. Kaylee resides in the Pas on Treaty 5 territory. Her professional journey began as correctional officer, which later transitioned into advocacy work. As the former executive director of the Elizabeth Bar Society of Saskatchewan, she championed the rights of women, girls, and gender diverse individuals who face the criminal justice system. Deeply passionate about social justice and human rights, Kaylee is thrilled to lead the new pre-law program aimed at benefiting Indigenous and Northern students. I will say that we were supposed to have Stephanie Bach from my office at the panel today, and she wasn't able to make it. So I might jump in with my comments. In terms of my bio, which really I should have written in first person and I didn't, so I'm going to change it to first person as I speak. I'm a family lawyer at Mitousis Lemieux Howard Law Corporation, and I'm the chair of the Manitoba Bar Association's Young Lawyer section. I earned my Juris Doctor from the University of Manitoba, Roslyn Hall, as all of you are, and was called to the bar in 2019. I actually immigrated to Canada at 9 years old, so I myself have experienced some of the difficulties navigating new spaces without having the knowledge of the language or cultural differences, not legally when I moved here, but generally through schooling, through everything. So I understand some of the difficulties that people may face in access to justice barriers. In addition to my background, I have volunteer experience, and my practice focuses a lot on family matters involving domestic violence issues. So I am very passionate about access to justice and barriers that individuals continue to face in accessing those legal services. So I will get started here. So as I said, this is going to be a roundtable discussion. There'll be some questions for the panelists, and I'll kind of go around and say who's next to speak, or people can start jumping in as they are able to. This is a very, very important topic. It is the new lawyers are going to be the foundation of the legal system at some point or another, right? So just like training, back in the day a little bit, even continuing to train lawyers not to be sexist or not to be racist. Not all of these things are very important for new lawyers to be trained from the get-go and to be aware of issues that there might be for accessing justice. For many, because there's a lot of barriers, there's very many different barriers, and some of them we may not even be cognizant of if we don't have these discussions. So these discussions are very important so that as new lawyers, as students, as you grow towards your own practices, you incorporate to the best of your ability the skills and put a focus on helping individuals access justice. So I'll start with question 1. What challenges and/or gaps currently exist with respect to training, mentorship, and retention of young lawyers, internationally trained lawyers, or lawyers in Northern Manitoba, and how do these challenges impact access to justice? Kaylee, did you want to start off?
Sure. Thank you, Mercedes, and thank you for having me. I'm joining from Treaty 5 territory, and I'm just very excited to be on this panel today. So today I'm representing the students that are coming from the North. Northern and Indigenous students are largely supported by UCN and have been for about the last 20 years. We've been providing many different certificates and degrees, and started being able to have university level degrees in 2004 here at UCN. And so when I think about these gaps and these challenges, there's two perspectives that I'm sort of thinking of. It's getting those students to our programming, and then also getting those students to law school. And so this term is our first year with our pre-law program. And one of the biggest challenges facing students in the North is geography. I'm based in the Pas, and that's 600 kilometers north of Winnipeg. And there may be some people who are joining us from Winnipeg, and we don't quite see outside of the perimeter sometimes. But for the perspective is, the Pas kind of the beginning of the North. And I'm really thinking, you know, the wide, vast amount of folks that we have in the North. We've got almost 30 First Nations and 15 communities, and that's a lot of people that could be educated and brought into the legal profession. I think about food security and housing and daycare and what that realistically looks like for students to be coming from their First Nation communities to come in, get an education in the Paw or Thompson, which is where we currently have the pre-law program. But then really focusing and thinking, what's that going to look like when students have to come and relocate their whole lives and do law school in Winnipeg? That's going to be difficult for some, and there are a handful of folks who have done that. And I think one of the key focuses in my role as the coordinator is bringing those stories of those folks who have have come from the North, come from Indigenous communities in the North, and they have made that journey to law school and they're practicing lawyers, or, we're actually right now strongly represented within our judges of folks who were raised in the North and have now returned. And we want to continue that cycle, and we want to ensure that the students are strongly supported through their studies, through their undergrad, and then continuing on to law school. You're muted.
Muted. Ayo, do you want to go next? Thank you, Kaylee.
Okay, thank you, Mercedes. Again, I'm Ayo, one of the co-chairs of the internationally trained lawyer section of the MBA. I apologize for my voice. I did come down with a flu over the weekend, and this is unavoidable, so just bear with me. As it relates to your question, I'd like to first, I want people, listening to view ITLs from two different lenses, and that would basically be internationally trained lawyers who are born in Canada, but for one reason or the other, uh, they decided to pursue their studies abroad in Australia, in the United Kingdom, or anywhere else in the United States, and also on the other part are those who are, born outside Canada and they've been trained outside Canada. And you find, especially, in countries like the Philippines, India, Nigeria, where I'm originally from. And those are the two groups really that the internationally trained lawyer section of the MBA is capturing. Now, part of the issues I'll be discussing is not may not necessarily fit into both categories at once, but uh, some of those issues will touch on, one grouping, the other might touch on the other grouping, but it's not, if one doesn't capture both, it's not because it's being sidelined in any way. It's just because of the peculiarity of the nature of how internationally trained lawyers have come to become a part of the profession in Manitoba. Now, the first issue is um, having access to the right information. Now, that goes with what I'll call training and mentorship. Not, if the challenges that internationally trained lawyers face starts from trying to have an understanding of the process and the procedures that they need to undertake when they are trying to join the profession. It starts with writing, getting an assessment done, with the NCA, trying to find the right information, trying to find the right study materials, or even other candidates or other lawyers, internationally trained lawyers that are in the process as well. And that's not, it's not just the only aspect to it. You're dealing with different bodies. You're dealing with the NCA, you're dealing with, in the case of Manitoba, CIPLED, which is an entirely different body. Then you're dealing with the Law Society requirements itself as regards articling. So it's really a challenge for all for anyone that is new to the system to understand how to get all of this information as a one-stop shop place where you can typically follow the process. You have to be able to piece together different information in order to have a good overview of the process for your qualification. Another thing is support and networking. For ITLs that are born in Canada, this would involve reestablishing contacts because they've been outside the country for a while. And for others, it means creating new relationships, trying to forge a mentor-mentee relationship. And without these kind of networking opportunities, it serves as a hindrance, to securing the right opportunities for training and for mentorship. I'll be drawing a bit of comparison. It's not to say each individual do not have their own peculiar set of challenges, but they will, because this is just focused on internationally trained lawyers. For example, if you're trained in Canada, you've gone through the university that is focused on providing career services. As a matter of fact, some of the schools, part of the key statistics that is just for marketing is that they are able to provide some sort of gateway to becoming a part of the profession. And so students that are trained in Canada will, from day one of being in law school, find summer placements during their first and second year of study. And also, by the time they get into the third year, they're already securing articling positions. This is not the case with internationally trained lawyers. They have to persistently sell their global experience as a quality, not a handicap. And that puts the legal markets at odds with the rest of the country's, open, multicultural social attitude. Again, during the hiring process, internationally trained lawyers find it as a necessity to have to justify their choice to study abroad, the reasons for coming back home, and they have to also defend the quality of their foreign education compared to the Canadian trained counterparts. Another issue that is a challenge is the integration into the legal profession, where the feelers occasionally that internationally trained lawyers get is a we and versus them attitude, which is not necessarily a good approach, especially as it relates to access to justice. We need to have a collaborative approach, whether you're trained locally in Canada or you're internationally trained. Another issue, of course, is systemic discrimination. This could be as a result of non-familiarity with, people's names, culture, faith, language, accent, and things of that nature. Just has a way of being seem like a big challenge for internationally trained lawyers. Now, in addition to that, is also the cost of requalifying, because a lot of internationally trained lawyers are also coming from another country, trying to settle down, they're trying to raise kids, they're trying to navigate the immigration system, and at the same time, paying, the cost required for for their study programs, for the bar admission program, and the rest. So as it relates to training and mentorship, those are the challenges. And as it relates to the retention, the issue is that when ITLs, internationally trained lawyers, are not able to find employment or have networking opportunities, when they're done with the process, you'd find out that a lot of lawyers would probably just start their own firms, which discourages active partnerships, especially in rendering services to clients. Now, to move that to how that affects access to justice, at the risk of not sounding philosophical, justice, again, we have to look at it from different perspectives. One is the protection of the public through finding and retaining counsel and the ease of access to the justice administration system. And also we have to look at it on a broader scale of justice for the internationally trained lawyers themselves, who are participants and stakeholders in the justice administration system. The first thing is a lawyer without access to training and mentoring may not be able to adequately support members of the public, such that such lawyer may just simply be set up for failure by not having the right proper training, guidance, or mentorship, as the case may be. In terms of employment, internationally trained lawyers do not find it easy to secure articling positions. The average ICL speaks another language, has a different cultural practice, and merging all of this together, it sort of affects the way ICLs are not able to particularly render services to clients who share the same cultural values or language, as the case may be. Another thing is from feelers that, in the public, it's hard to retain counsel because understandably, so a lot of lawyers are busy, not probably taking on clients, and it shows that the system requires more professionals to assist clients. And if ITLs are embraced and, the pathway to practicing becomes easier, then it's going to create more opportunities for clients to secure clients to represent them for their legal issues. So as far as that is concerned, I think for me that those are the barriers or challenges that ITLs face as it relates to access to justice.
Great, thank you. Laurel, do you have anything to add?
Hi, everybody. I echo much of what Ayo has spoken of. So I'm going to flip the question. So why is it so important that we actually address these issues around access to justice? I'll give you a great example. Almost 49% of the city of Winnipeg is comprised of folks who are Indigenous or racialized. So we're talking about folks that need access to services, often are not getting access to services. Folks from other marginalized groups as well. We know that, for example, members of 2S LGBTQI plus communities often also have difficulties accessing legal services that are culturally literate. We won't even say competent, because competency takes time and no one can become competent in every single area of representational diversity that makes up our country and our city and our province, right? But what we need is literacy, and we need folks who are accessing service to be safe culturally when they do that. And so that's the goal. I mean, province-wide, the numbers are not as startlingly different as in the city. It's still the Indigenous population combined with the racialized population of this province is still well over, like, close to 40% or over 40%. So we're talking about a huge population of folks who need access to services, who don't actually receive access to those services in a way that is either they're not accessing at all, or when they do get there, their needs aren't being met as fulsomely as they should be, because the lawyers don't understand the nuances of being culturally safer and being more literate. So that's the biggie. And then working back from that, when we're talking about, again, increasingly the folks that are coming into law school, we're still, clearly there's still underrepresentation of folks in law school. But even when people get in, we're still seeing the same sorts of things that Ayo has described. Like, so for example, anecdotally, we can see that internationally trained lawyers who have a global South accent, and what I mean by that is not a British accent, not an Australian accent, not a German accent, not a Swiss accent, right? Whatever. People who have accents that our ears are less trained to, not that their accent is so heavy, but we aren't trained to hear those accents, and we haven't required ourselves to be trained to hear accents. There's an accent bias. So few and far between will you see folks with global South accents in mid-sized or larger firms in this province. That's a reality, and that's something that we need to advocate with firms and to educate folks about. We do hear that again anecdotally. Well, the clients won't understand the person because their accent is so heavy. Those sorts of things that really just don't wash. And we need to start getting folks to the point where we don't create artificial barriers that are really grounded in systemic oppressions that we don't want to acknowledge, right? So that's one of them, for example. Access to good educational opportunities. Too frequently, great education means getting that great education within cultures which are deeply unsupportive. We know, we've been known for decades that women are leaving private practice in droves, still are, right? We enter into private practice, but the number of women who reach partnership are still not proportionate to men, of all racializations, right? We still know that, very few Black people have achieved partnership status in any mid-sized firm in Manitoba, or larger, right? Like that's not something also that has happened typically. So we know that these cultures are unsupportive. We also know that there is data that's emerging about that. So for example, the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers, with some funding from TD, just did a survey of a national climate survey for Black lawyers. And the data is still being analyzed, but the early data was presented at the Cable Conference, the national conference, a couple of weeks ago. And what we know is that the vast majority of Black women are experiencing microaggressions on a regular basis in their work environments. Black men are also reporting microaggressions, but disproportionately Black women are being impacted. So we need to also think about intersecting and intersectional identities and oppressions. So those are some of the ways in which we're being impacted. The factual result is what Ayo is describing. So whether that's internationally trained lawyers, whether that's Indigenous folks, whether that is racialized lawyers who were educated in Canada, there still are, in various degrees, in various ways, a lack of opportunity and access to quality education once folks leave law school. So that's a very long-winded answer, I hope, but I hope that sort of gives like a broader sort of overview of what we're dealing with in terms of access.
Thank you, Laurel. And I'll keep it short, but in respect of young lawyers, for a lot of young lawyers, if you don't get your foot in the door at one of those big firms or one of those firms that are hiring articling students openly, it can become quite daunting to do it all on your own. For myself, I'm an immigrant and I came from a family of no lawyers whatsoever. I was lucky enough to get an offer during the recruitment period, but had I not, I would have no connections. And so it does become an issue when you're trying to make change, trying to break down these barriers, and you don't have any mentorship. You don't know where to go to for mentorship. You don't know where to go to for your articling, let alone being retained by a firm if you haven't even gotten your foot in the door. So those are kind of some of the challenges that are faced by young lawyers, some young lawyers, and some are lucky that they don't have to face those challenges at all. But it all depends. And those were all very, very helpful discussions. Thank you. I'll go to the second question, a little bit more positive. So what supports do exist or are in development within your respective organizations to try to break down the barriers we just discussed? And Ayo, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So part of recognizing the challenges that I spoke about at a webinar last year was when the MBA decided to come up with the internationally trained lawyer section, and for the first time we got together in April of this year, where through the support of the MBA and the Law Society, internationally trained lawyers were able to, interact with each other and network. It was really, I'll consider that a good start point for future supports that are going to be put in place. And for once, internationally trained lawyers understand that, they're not necessarily alone in this journey, and they can rely, on each other's expertise. They can use that as an opportunity to network and secure mentoring as the case may be. So that, is a good step with regards to trying to network, with regards to trying to interact with each other. And also, it's not stopping at that when, the ITL section is not going to be a distinct part of the bar, as the case may be. I mean, it's not going to be separate entirely. What it means is that part of the work of the ITL section is also to integrate with the bar through organizing programs and CPDs with other practice sections, such that part of the issues that, part of the challenges that are being faced by the ITLs are brought into the practice sections on a section by section basis, such that those issues are being dealt with gradually. So part of the first thing is we're creating networking opportunities. The second thing is we intend to continue to organize CPDs and programs, which for one is one that we're currently holding. Another one, I believe, is coming up at the Midwinter Conference. And another one is also going to be put in place by the ITL section in collaboration with one of the practice sections. We've also initiated plans to create a one-stop place for access to information. So what this is going to do is to bring all of this information that are scattered all over and sometimes not even updated will be collated and put into one resource that any ITL can easily make reference to understand, the process of getting into the profession and any resources that might be in place. Part of what we've also done, which I'm sure Laura will speak more about, is that at the initial planning phase of creating a more formal, structured educational program for ITLs, the ITL section, had discussions, as the case may be, and offered input and insight into, what ITLs would like to see when this program is being implemented. And part of it is not just, having the formal or structured educational environment, is also to have the practical training. And so, again, Laurel is going to speak better about this, but that's, an initiative that has now been developed, and we're very, very excited to continue to collaborate and work together in that space. The other thing is we also intend to be seeking representation in important units within the legal profession and the justice administration system by way of advocacy, such that at the end of the day, you can trust, that engaging with an ITL, working together with an ITL, partnering is also just simply going to lead to better access to justice on the long run. So those are some of the initiatives that have been put in place and supports that will come into place as this section evolves.
Great, thank you. Laurel, do you want to go next and we'll finish with Kaylee?
Sure. I will hop in. So yes, to build on what Ayo has been speaking of, the Internationally Trained Lawyer Program at U of M was just approved to the University Senate in June. And so this is an emerging brand new program that will be welcoming its first cohort next fall. My job is to set up that program and actually build it out from the core academic program, to take back all of the feedback from the consultations that have been done to date and will continue to do, to build a program that's actually responsive to the needs of internationally trained lawyers and actually making their way into and becoming fully professionally included in our in our legal community. So that has two components to it. It's building a great program that helps remove those barriers, all the barriers that I was talking about, the fact that there's fees at various points in time along the way, the complexity of navigating those systems, and the frustration of trying to do that by yourself, all of those pieces. And then the other side, the other piece to that is also making sure that we are also, sorry, I talk and then I lose my train of thought every once in a while. It happens at least once every time I talk. But the other piece to that is in terms of building out the structures of the program, but the other piece is also I see my role as that of an advocate between the program and the profession, so that the gaps in the profession that we're talking about, the places where we can do better as a profession around including internationally trained lawyers and recognizing the inherent value of folks who have been internationally trained as contributors to our legal system, is really essential to, and it actually in firms' best interest, right? To be able to actually serve clients that come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and be able to do that really well. So the purpose of the program really is to make it an easier pathway. When folks are trying to qualify as internationally trained lawyers, they have like one or two options. You can self-study and write exams, which the feedback is deeply isolating and doesn't help in terms of professional inclusion because you're studying basically by yourself. Or you can apply on an ad hoc basis to join a law program, but again, there's no that people are still navigating those systems as individuals, as opposed to having a program that's already been built to do that and to make that process a bit easier. The other thing that we're working on right now is actually, again, taking that feedback, and we're continuing to gather feedback from not just Manitoba, but internationally trained lawyers across the country, is to build in meaningful clinical opportunities that are going to help internationally trained lawyers make connections, get additional clinical experience in the areas of law that they're interested in. And so that's all still in the works, but we're expecting to be able to offer clinical opportunities for credit in the ITL program in the areas in family law, in criminal law, in international human rights law, in access to justice in French, hopefully. And I'm missing one area, business law. And so those are all areas where access to justice is an issue. And that will also, hopefully in the future, what we're hoping is to be able to expand that out a bit into a bit of an incubator for internationally trained lawyers. But you know, that's a long-term vision, but the short-term vision is start to create clinical opportunities that both help serve access to justice in the province and meet those aims, and also provide these extra opportunities for clinical training and to make connections and start networking. The other thing that we're doing is that, again, we heard from folks about the way that career services are just really disjointed, they're not organized. And the problem is, if you're a student and you're an internationally trained lawyer, all of the articling opportunities, all the summering opportunities follow that 1L, 2L, 3L, like that calendar and that flow. And so internationally trained lawyers don't necessarily fit neatly in those categories. So we're actually working on providing dedicated opportunities for those types of career networking opportunities that law students have generally, and certainly internationally trained lawyers can still take advantage of those. But we want to make sure that we can actually create opportunities for greater exposure for internationally trained lawyers to make those connections in the legal community from a career services standpoint. And we're also going to be working on we're going to be having career services workshops, orientation very early in the school year. And that will allow us, again, to start helping folks with resume writing, with cover letter writing, because not that folks can't do it, but that, you know, the Canadian market has expectations of what a resume looks like, and making sure that folks have resumes that allow them to be competitive within this market as early as possible, so that the opportunity to make those connections can begin in a meaningful way. So those are a few of the ways. There's other things that we're working on, but those are the few of the ways that we're trying to build out wraparound supports that actually address the problems with not just getting folks through, but then actually successfully becoming included in the profession. So I know, again, I'm super long-winded, but that's the goal.
Thank you, Laurel. And Kaylee, what about you? What about for the Northern students and lawyers?
Yeah, so I think the development of the pre-law pathway is the biggest way that we're wanting to support those students. Initially, right from the development of this initiative, we're seeing students who have a lot of interest. We've got 17 students in our first cohort, which I think is a really great number to be starting with, who are just seeing pre-law and feeling like they have a step into this space. And I think that's what's really important. From my perspective is I want to be, as the coordinator of this, the bridge to be bringing a lot of what Io and Laurel have been talking about, starting, in that undergrad phase of networking opportunities, showing these students spaces, courthouses, firms, introducing them to professionals that they can see themselves reflected in, and ensuring that they really feel supported right from the get-go. A big part of my role right now is supporting those 17 students in academia that they may not have been in before, and so it's really meeting them where they're at. I had sort of started thinking that my first term it was going to be very structured and I was going to have presentations and da 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 da. Well, I've learned very quickly, I have to meet these students where they're at, and some of them are still struggling with finding housing and daycare, and are learning what it is to be in their undergrad studies. And so just making sure that you're really meeting the students where they're at, and that's the main focus of my role. Other ways that we are working sort of bigger picture is partnerships. Working with the Law Society right now on a possible project of getting together to tour some places in the north and bringing legal professionals to even younger students, high school students, and really advocating for the legal profession in the north. Again, it's the challenges are really basic challenges, like we're talking transportation and access, and even for you know, stakeholders and professionals to be coming to the north, and for bringing those students to the south. Like those, when you really look at it, those are quite big barriers. So I'm really hoping that we can be, and this program will be, what brings all of us together to support these students to get into law school.
Great, thank you. It's crazy to see both the similarities and the differences in the challenges, right? With respect to young lawyers, I can say that we have many events with respect to networking or trying to reach out to law students, trying to make those connections. But even as we're having these discussions, I'm thinking, I need to reach out to Kaylee, I need to reach out to AO, because there's not enough, and there's so much that we could all do together to really help one another. And like Aya was saying, it's not just internationally trained lawyers that should be in this cohort together. It has to be all intermixed so that everybody's getting the mentorship, the training, the help that they need to better be able to provide services and thus provide better access to justice. So you'll get an email from me at some point, I'm sure, but thank you for those discussions. For the third question here, what role can members of the profession play in supporting the initiatives that we just described? So Kaylee, do you want to start again?
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think that, as far as the perspective of our newer program, it's going to be an ever-changing, development of how these students can be supported. But I really do think that mentorship, the first thing though is that visibility. Like I want to connect. So if there are Northern or Indigenous lawyers out there who, wherever you're practicing, sharing your story with me and sharing it with the students, making those connections. I've been really lucky to start networking, and I'm supported by a lot of really great folks, but I just want to continue to dig up those stories and representation to bring to these students and to future students, so that they know that they can do this as well. And then later on in the journey too, I mean, it's going to be summer jobs, it's going to be mentorships, it's going to be helping create events, to have these students meet the professionals in the legal system. Um, Yeah, I think it's going to be ever evolving, and I think just reaching out and working together is going to be a huge part of the success of the students in the pre-law pathway.
Thank you. Ayo, would you like to go next?
Okay, thank you. We'll be looking forward to that email. And in terms of what members of the profession can, the role they can play, one, um, uh, attending a program of this nature is one way, because what it does is it helps everyone educate themselves and others about internationally trained lawyers and the requalification process, and understanding that having gone through, these steps, the expectation is that um, the different bodies have set in place different criteria to ensure that upon joining the profession, that internationally trained lawyer is competent to provide services to clients, is competent to address legal issues. And with that recognition comes the place for collaboration, comes the place to understand that working together would, provide better access to justice, understanding that there's a reflection on a general basis in the country, which is a reflection of how our society is, of how our community is, understanding that, clients to a very large extent also want to see um, people who they share the same distinguishing characteristics with. They want to see them be active players in the legal profession and the justice administration system. Um, as a The second thing is we can't say it enough, and it's always work in progress, and it's applicable to everyone. We all must strive to continue to try to be culturally competent, understand the nature of systemic racism, and take active steps to eradicate that wherever we find ourselves or in our respective organizations. Um, Another thing, and again, this is subject to ongoing discussions at for the CPDs, is creating employment, opportunities, and revamping the hiring process to include internationally trained lawyers outside of the system already in place in terms of recruitment. The other thing would be to for different practice, I've mentioned this, different practice section areas, law firms to collaborate with internationally trained lawyers to better understand how whatever gaps or, challenges have been identified with respect to um, enabling better access to justice is dealt with, and then capacity can be developed. This may sound a little bit political, but please voting ITLs into positions where they can also really make meaningful changes to the system rather than being all looking from the outside, because when you're not engaged, you really do not have the depth of understanding to see how ITLs can contribute effectively based on the kind of experience they've had, the diverse experience they've had, the different, in some way, educational pathway that they followed in order to actually broaden and better the Canadian legal landscape. It's not really a disadvantage. It shouldn't also be seen so much as a favor, but as, building partnerships. It should be seen more as building partnerships. It should be seen more as even creating better economic outlook. Because at the end of the day, in my line of work, you'd find situations where it's now becoming a requirement to show diverse spending, to show your understanding of world issues, to show your understanding of cultural practices. So it's not just for any business that's looking to grow, it's now a necessity as against, just something that is nice to do or nice to have on the side. So for that, I'll implore other members of the profession to contribute in ways that I've mentioned, and hopefully we have a better system, a better collaboration that leads to access to justice.
Perfect, thank you. Laurel, do you want to jump on?
Sure, thanks. So those of you who know me well know that I'm going to say the same thing I say a lot. We need to start being honest as a profession about what the barriers are to entry into practice and retention in practice for marginalized lawyers. Right now, we are at a stage where, particularly in Winnipeg, we're just beginning, most firms are just beginning in many cases to talk about representational diversity, and are actively seeking to hire lawyers from marginalized groups. That is happening. What's not yet happening is real conversations about what has to happen within firm cultures. We still are expecting people who don't fit into a, frankly, Eurocentric model of a business and a workplace. We're still expecting those folks to change themselves and leave parts of themselves behind to fit into a culture in the workplace that doesn't allow them to flourish. And so what does that do? It then reinforces stereotypes about capacity for marginalized lawyers. And, it reinforces expectations that lawyers will fail. I mean, I've been talking about this a lot lately, and it's an old study, but I've been talking about this study a lot lately because I think it really is one of those things that we really just don't think enough about the biases that we are bringing with us into our practices, and as we run our firms, those biases and how they're challenging folks. There was a study that was done in the States that had it had a legal memo, and one group of partners, who was a multiracial panel of partners, and there were two groups of partners who were asked to evaluate that memo, and that memo included legal errors, analytical errors, spelling errors, grammar errors. There were 22 errors in different categories. These partners were asked to evaluate the quality of the memo and correct the memo. And what happened was that one group was told that the person was a Black law student, a Black lawyer who had graduated from NYU, and the other group had been told that it was a white lawyer who graduated from NYU. And what came out very strongly across the board is that there was a very strong confirmation bias. The folks that thought that the legal memo was written by somebody who was white graded the memo overall better than the people who thought that the same exact memo, the author was Black. They picked up on more mistakes. They looked for more mistakes out of the memo from the Black person, likely, and picked up on fewer mistakes when it was the white person. So we see what we're going to see. And that's just one example, but when we need to start challenging our expectations at those incredibly subtle cellular levels about what does it take to be recognized, to have one's work recognized within a firm environment, and to be given the same shots, to be tapped on the shoulder with interesting work that allows you to build your expertise and have people go, ooh, that's partnership material, as opposed to ghettoizing people, making assumptions about capacity or unconsciously applying biases about capacity that we're not even really thinking about, and automatically making those folks' practices smaller, their exposure smaller, and not giving them the education they deserve. So that is, to me, the number one thing that we need to do. Is we actually have to start grappling with the ways that law firm culture really are geared towards helping some folks succeed and are not geared towards recognizing the ways in which the very culture itself interrupts success. So that's, again, my very super long-winded chat, but I think that really is what it comes down to at this point, is that we need to just shift our perspectives and be really honest with ourselves about the ways that biases creep up and manifest within legal practice.
Those are all great points, thank you. With respect to the young lawyers that I guess I represent, I think that the profession has a big role to play. I think that there's so many great mentors who step up, but should it really be in the hands of these 10, 20 people who are, for lack of a better word, busting their ass to mentor so many young lawyers, and for others to just do nothing? Should there be more push from the Law Society to have mentorship as part of a yearly requirement, some sort of programming, or even, you know, how we do the EPPM hours? How about some mentorship hours? How about more advertising encouragement? For the smaller firms, I think that they have to be clear that they may have the budget to hire and they just don't know what the early recruitment time, because I think a lot of students think, oh, if I don't get a job at early recruitment, I don't have articling, I'm done. When in reality, it's just some of the smaller firms may or may not, and they just won't know until the last minute. And even having that knowledge, that understanding would take so much weight off of students and young lawyers as they're moving through the legal system, their profession. I really think that mental health is a big deal. I like that we have Lawyers Strong. I think that that has to be recognized and by all firms, encouraged by all firms, and again, advertised, just the awareness of it spread, because we are going to lose lawyers if we continue at the rates that we've always been going. We just are. And that's lawyers of any kind. If you're racialized and you feel oppressed, or microaggressions or macroaggressions against you, why would you stay? If you're a young lawyer and you have no idea what you're doing and you're faltering and being thrown to the wolves, why would you stay? If you don't have the transportation to get to one place to the other, how are you gonna do work even if you care about it and it's meaningful to you? So I think so much of this is on the profession to really step up, to increase awareness, to put in hours for mentorship, regardless of what area of law they do, regardless of their own. It's almost like it should be, like I'm saying, like more of a requirement to have some sort of mentorship in place, to always be mentoring somebody, because I know that I do all I can to, you know, I'm in the young lawyers, and I do to the extent that my boss tells me, no, you're not allowed to sign up for things anymore. It has to be somebody else in the firm. So, and that's because my boss is like that too. She takes on everything and she mentors people. That's why I was thinking contacting you, Kaylee and Ayo, about mentorship specifically within your communities with young lawyers, and older lawyers, because they would have something that's just what my thoughts were going, something more in common, but still being able to mentor young lawyers and being able to help them through all these barriers that the people before them push through and work through, and assisting them a little bit in that regard. So it's, instead of making it harder and harder every year, like making it easier, so that people who are willing and able to do this really important access to justice work have the tools to do so, right? We still have some time. I don't see any questions so far, so I'll ask one more question, just a brief one. So how do you intend on measuring, we've discussed a lot of things today. How do you intend on measuring the success of these programs, or future or past programs, or current? And Laurel, do you want to start?
We're already starting to think about that. There's no way to do equity work properly if we don't actually gather data. We need to understand, you know, more than just anecdotally, and we're starting to see like the data that we need to actually do the work that we need to do. We're starting to understand that, but we don't understand it well enough. And in order to measure whether these programs are well, we actually are, as a community, going to have to get better about the way that we gather data and track folks. So for example, you know, at the law school, we can track to some extent if, and this is all voluntary, you never force people to disclose what their identities are or anything like that, right? But, you know, we can track folks up to the stage of articles, right? If they're coming out of Robson Hall, we can see where they summered, we can see if they have articles, but then, you know, it falls off at that point. And so part of what I think does need to happen is that we have to start collecting better data. You know, and the example that I would use, and I think the gold standard for that is the new categories that have been recommended for the Federal Employment Equity Act. which I know sounds crazy because this isn't about federal jurisdiction. All the lawyers like, what do you mean? Why are we talking about that? Bear with me for a second. The way that we currently collect data when we talk about visible minorities, which is a term that should be shelved forever, visible minorities, Indigenous persons, persons with disabilities, and women, those are the 4 categories that were set out under the Federal Employment Equity Act 30 years ago. And that generally, when we do track data, like for example, right now in our member report for the Law Society, that's the data that gets collected. There was a massive employment equity system review that was conducted at the instance of the federal government by Professor Del Blackett, who is a Black law professor at McGill University, who led that team, 496-page report. And that report tells us a lot because the federal government is the country's largest employer, right? So it gives us a really good sense of how people are doing, and that includes justice-related organizations. So we know stuff, right? For example, so what we should be doing is using those categories to track. And what that system review report recommended was that the Employment Equity Act be amended to collect data about Black persons as a distinct category, Indigenous persons as a distinct category, which it already is, racialized persons, 2S LGBTQI plus persons, and persons with disabilities and women, so that there would be 6 categories that we would collect data on. And the reason for that was that in all of this investigation, they found that not all lawyers are treated equally in the profession, right? Not all employees generally outside of law are treated equally in the profession, in their professions. What we know is that Black people have a much harder time gaining promotion, like moving through organizations. Same thing with Indigenous folks. Are racialized persons, other racialized persons also impacted? Absolutely, but in different ways, right? And so we need to be really much more sort of thoughtful about what we're collecting and why we're collecting it, starting with actually collecting data that's useful. Because collecting data about visible minorities without actually disaggregating that doesn't give us a full picture of who's really able to navigate the profession and who isn't able to navigate things as well and where those barriers are. I would love it if we could get to a point where we could have a 3-party, data collection experiment between the Law Society and the MBA and the law school or something like that. I'm not speaking for the law school, I'm not the dean, but I would love to see something like that down the road. I don't think it's actually that hard for us to do it and would allow us to really understand what's happening in our province. And then we can actually respond in a meaningful way. So that's kind of my dream wish list. I don't know if it's going to happen, but we need to develop metrics. I don't know how you measure success without knowing what you're measuring.
Okay, Kaylee, did you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think in the early stages of development of this pre-law pathway here in the North, our measures are application, and we're looking at, okay, so after that, who has registered for our courses? And so now we've got our cohort, our first cohort and their first team. But I really want to be able to measure the success of those students going through their undergrad and, coming out prepared for what law school looks like. And so, and hopefully with the ability to apply successfully to law school. So that's kind of what I'm thinking 2 to 4 years down the road is ensuring that the cohorts that we have here at UCN are also going to be successful getting into law school, as it's, quite demanding. And then the larger picture is who's returning to the North to come and practice and work in these legal spaces and create more legal spaces and strengthen Indigenous laws through our First Nations. And, so I'm not sure how to measure that into the future, sort of as Laurel said, but that's really what I see as the success of how this pathway can support the students here in the North.
Great, thank you. And Ayo?
Okay, thank you. I have to say I wholeheartedly support what Lorella said about using, data to measure the successes. I just want to break it down, from the ITL perspective, that such data that will be collected. This is not exhaustive, but we would like to see things like which ITLs, which firms are ITLs working at, or which organizations. What's the timeline for ITLs to secure articles? Which are ITLs able to actually be a part of the justice administration system, and also we intend to continue to receive feedback, whether on a confidential, anonymous basis, in order to support, the work we're doing, and to measure the level of changes, and also integration that we're seeing with respect to, ITLs being able to effectively participate in the justice administration system.
Great, thank you. I can tell you for myself, for the young lawyer section, we're not great on this, I'll be honest. We try to get input feedback after each event that we host, whether we have student representatives usually, so I say, hey, go ask around. Tell me what they say. We send out feedback forms. Some people reach out to the MBA directly. In midwinter, there's the sheets that people actually fill out. But you've all brought up very important points. It's not just about, this is all multifaceted. It's not just about being a young lawyer. What if you're a racialized young lawyer? What if you're a young lawyer from the North? What if you're all of it? Like, and a female and an internationally trained lawyer. And there's so many different things that we could be looking at to see where more assistance is needed, or where more work is required by looking at all those things. So everything you have all said today has given me so many ideas. I can barely keep track of everything. I was telling Kaylee that I wasn't sure if she spoke yet, because I was already getting on the next step of things that I want to do to be able to connect with Kaylee and Ayo, to be able to make these events and things happen. So I'm feeling very motivated, and I appreciate all of you for speaking today. I don't see any questions in the questions and answers box. Does anybody have any final comments before we finish off? Anybody want to say anything else? Everyone's good? Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time. That was very meaningful to me, so I'm sure I was to many people. And I hope you have a great rest of your Monday afternoon.
Thank you
Bye.
so much for having me.
Of course,
Thanks so
thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.